A noose, actually two of them, hung from trees during the summer in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, that reminded several Brooklyn residents of lynching. When you consider that these incidents occurred at the same time that some high-profile black professional football players have decided to kneel during the playing of the national anthem in protest against police brutality against minorities, several uncomfortable questions immediately roll off the lips of many Brooklyn residents. Protests across the country by white supremacists at the removal of the Confederate statues add to what has become a new reality and give rise to discussion and varying points of view all across America. Joining me to discuss this are the president of the NAACP in Brooklyn, LaJoy Williams, and New York Assemblyman Charles Barron. Welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thanks for having us.
LaJoy, you were quoted as saying that you believe that the rope on the trees were actually intended to stoke fear amongst young people. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, particularly, I mean, that was the symbol, besides obviously the historical symbol, right, is the purpose of hanging a noose, whether it was to actually hang someone or just hanging it standalone, was to stoke fear. And so we have to assume that anyone who would do the same thing, who would model practices done by white supremacists, done by people who were murderers, right, who went through this country stoking fear in, trying to stoke fear in the hearts of people of color in this country, that was their intent. And certainly in Brooklyn, we're not going to stand for it, and we're going to raise our voices and stand against anyone trying to do that similar activity.
What have you been hearing from residents?
Well, you know, from a lot of seniors, a lot of my senior members, right, that migrated from the South here, up north, it reminds them of something. My grandmother now lives up here. My grandmother is 93. She lived in a very segregated, a very turbulent time in the South in North Carolina. And she remembers what those were hung for. You know, they were hung to keep people in their place, to let them know not to do anything or try to assert themselves or assert their rights. And so for that population, it is a reminder to that time. Particularly for young people, talking to some of our younger members, they know it in a historical context. So while they may not immediately have the same fear, because that connection is not the same, say for my 93-year-old grandmother, they are at least aware what it was used for, right? So thankfully, some of the power of the fear has been taken out of it for our young people, but we certainly don't want them to feel comfortable with this being done in their community.
Assemblyman Barron, what was your first reaction to this?
Well, you know, I've been down this road before.
Exactly, yes.
But when we talk about symbols of hate, the biggest symbol of hate is in the White House. So when you have this symbol of hate and racism in the White House, it's emboldening racists to come out even more. It's emboldening the neo-Nazis to come out when you got a neo-Nazi, Brandon, who was in the White House with Trump, and you have a racist, fascist, ignorant, egomaniac in the White House. 63 million people, and 95% of them white, voted for Donald Trump. And he's clearly a racist. So now they feel more emboldened to come out with more of the symbols and come out with the marches and say we want the statues to stay up. But I want to caution us. Capitalism has a way of building a propaganda machine that will frame the issues for you and have you reacting to powerless issues. If no one ever puts up another noose, we're still going to be in poverty. We're still going to be in high unemployment and all of the stuff that's really affecting our community. We can kneel every time the anthem is played. We can snatch down Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Columbus, who never discovered anything other than he was lost. We can do all of that, but we have to be careful not to allow the capitalist propaganda machine to shape the issues and shape the resistance. The day that Chuck Schumer becomes the resistance in our movement, we're doing bad, because this two-party capitalist system of Democrats and Republicans have maintained the kind of economically oppressed, depressed neighborhoods, and it's only marginally different. So when we start doing all of this anti-Noose, anti-anthem, and you know I'm one who's always been anti-anthem, we got to remember that the root causes of our problem is a racist, capitalist, parasitic system, the richest country in the world with some of the most abject poverty that's equivalent to a third world developing nation.
I think the Assemblyman brings up an excellent point in that even the work we're doing in protesting against injustice, talking about reform, talking about addressing those issues, even in bringing in those who are protesting in the NFL, who are getting away from the original issue to begin with. The original issue, it's not about being against the flag or being against the national anthem. It is protesting against a system, against police brutality. Yes. Right? And so to the Assemblyman's point, that is right. We've gotten, even the narrative in the media has gotten away from that very conversation.
Right.
And it's all about Colin Kaepernick not having a job, or, him, we're protesting against the flag or against the anthem. And what we're really protesting against is that structural barrier that exists of the police not being responsive and treating African Americans and people of color in this country as less than and not as equal citizens in this country. So those of us who are protesting, those of us who consistently protest, what we're talking about is the structural barriers and the structural supremacy that exist in this country, and that's what we're fighting against. Right. So the noose itself, yes, we do have to stand up and say something about it, because we can't make any space for racists to be comfortable wherever they are. Right. And so for those who are crying that, it's heritage, it's their, history, I think you need to think about your history as a white person, your history and culture as a person in this country, that the only thing you identify with is another racist and another bigot. Then that's something wrong with you and your history and your culture. It has nothing to do with us. Right. So even when these symbols of hate exist, and they can be in the White House or they can be hanging from a tree, we need to speak up and consistently say there is no place for that.
Right. Have things changed at all?
Well, not radically. There's always change. Change is a consistent, but not radically in enough where we don't have institutionalized racism and we're not suffering from all of the same kind of poverty we've always suffered from. But even look at the contradictions even within the protest. The white owners of the NFL, Trump united everybody. He got them all united. But these very white owners now that took a knee with their players because they said, Trump, don't mess with our money. You're messing with our money. But these same white owners that took a knee, just to show you how capitalism has a way of controlling things, they took a knee and protested with the players, and they're the ones who won't give Colin Kaepernick a contract because he protests. So how do you not give the leader of the protest, none of the 32 NFL owners, by the way, are all white. And one day we got to come back on and talk about how does black athletic talent develop all of these billions for these white owners, and not one of them own a franchise. There's 153 major franchises in the 6 major sports, and only Michael Jordan in basketball is a majority owner of a franchise. Yes. The 30 basketball teams, 29 whites. The 32 football owners, 32 whites. And we're talking about kneeling for the flag. We should, but we should stand up after we get up the kneeling and get off the plantation. And blacks need to own teams and not be traded and owned by white men like they on some plantation.
Now, Joy, we don't hear a lot about the NAACP. Why?
Well, there's a combination of things. I think the structure of the NAACP is one in which it makes it difficult for people. There are the local branches, like Brooklyn is a local branch, and then there's the national organization. We're actually a part of the national organization, but we're one of the only organizations on the ground that majority of the work of the association is done by local branches on the ground in their immediate communities. And so then it really depends on the people in that community, the people in that branch, in terms of the work that they are doing. And also, I would say there are a lot of new technology, new organizations that are doing work that historically NAACP has done in the past, but now people are more active and engaged. And there's a lot to be said from online activism where people don't have to put as much on the line in terms of their physical bodies or their physical space, and so there are other platforms that allow them to do that. But the organization still exists. It still exists in the over 2,000 branches that exist in this country that are fighting battles every day in local city halls, in the states across the country, and even here in the city.
Assemblyman Barron, are you a little concerned that these symbols of hate seem to be increasing recently?
Well, you're always concerned about symbols of hate. But, we live in a systemically racist society. And capitalism, which I think is fatally flawed and structured in a way to maintain a racist class structure so that all of the wealth is hoarded at the top with the 1%. And then the 99%, and particularly most of black and brown people at the bottom in poverty. So while there are symbols that are rising now because of Trump's racism, they feel emboldened. But even if Hillary was elected, and when Obama was elected, we didn't have a great improvement in poverty and the social issues in our community. So we got to look at, and this is why some of us are considered black radicals. And I think black radical politics needs to resurface. And radical just means getting to the root. Oftentimes we deal with symptomology. So if there's a machine over here producing poverty, producing unemployment, income inequality, inadequate health care, this machine is producing that. And we over here trying to get anti-poverty programs and more health care and more clinics and not dealing with the machine, the capitalism that's producing it. We're going to be at this forever. At some point, we got to get to systemic change and not just the symptomology. And that's why I firmly believe that America needs a revolution, a radical change in its system. I know people are afraid of hearing that word, but if you think that this system is going to last forever, you're wrong. All great empires fall. Remember the British said the sun never set on the British Empire, right, because of their imperialism. Now they're a little cloudy country in Europe and not as powerful as they used to be.
The removal of statues, that is offending many people who have been supporters of that group. The white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, and there have been protests by skinheads against
removing the statue.
But
you know what's worse, Sam? These Italian-American elected officials that doesn't want Columbus's statue removed. Now here, Columbus, everybody knows historically he was a racist colonist. Historically, he murdered indigenous people. Historically, he held enslaved Africans, murdered them as well, and they just said he has some character flaws. No, he was a colonist murderer. It's not the skinheads, that's a distraction. But that some of my colleagues right in the state assembly and some of the colleagues right in the city council said, leave Columbus alone. See, that's problematical. And then some of the blacks who will go against the Confederate flag and will be comfortably go against Stonewall Jackson and all of the Confederacy will say nothing about Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves because he was American. and they say nothing about the American flag. So it's not, in addition to the police brutality, when Betsy Ross was stitching the American flag, we were catching stitches in slavery. And when Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem, he was a racist. They left out a third segment of the anthem that talked about him saying that the slaves should be buried in their graves, because that was in 1812 when the war was going on, and he saw the bombs bursting in air, and he said Africans were fighting with the British Royal Navy because they promised them freedom that the colonists wouldn't give them. So we don't want to deal with American racism. The American flag killed more of us than the Confederate flag. It's safe to go against the Confederacy. It takes heart, guts to stand up and speak truth to power about the symbolic racism and the history of racism that's symbolized in the American flag.
So where do you see the NFL protests going?
I think that it's been co-opted. It started off, as Joyce said correctly, with Colin Kaepernick focusing on police brutality. That's off the table. So it's been co-opted. Everybody's taking a knee now. And that's what capitalism does. It co-opts the resistance. When they see they can't beat you, they join you. And they take it over. So now you got everybody taking a knee. And then they do it in different ways. Like some of the owners said, let's take a knee before the anthem. And then when the anthem comes, let's get back up. Some said, let's stay in the clubhouse, stay in the locker room. Others said, let's just lock arms, don't take the knee, lock arms. I mean, it's like it's being co-opted. And you cannot win a struggle when capitalist propaganda co-opts your resistance movement, and they prop up people now who are resistors that yesterday they were people we needed to resist.
Joy, what is the NAACP doing about all these recent things? Not just, you made your statements about the noose hanging, but what about the protests by the NFL players? What about the actions of the skinheads?
Right. So, in terms of the NFL, I agree with the Assemblyman. I think the movement there is being co-opted. The radical thing that could have happened for me is to see the owners actually address the original issue, which would be that of police brutality. And considering that that's not going to happen, I don't see any freedom, I don't see any justice in that action.
But you two people are very powerful people.
No,
you the NAACP and you as an Assemblyman.
I don't see that there. I think, and then individually in terms of power, my focus again is not on the NFL. My focus is on the people of color that exist and live here in Brooklyn. And what are we fighting against? And, yes, we're fighting against the symbols of hate. But again, I'm going back to my original statement, fighting against the structural barriers that exist in this state and in this city that prevent people of color from prospering and for them operating in their full constitutional rights as well. And so while at the same time we may be addressing issues of symbols of hate hanging from trees, we're also, as our meeting was just today, talking about health disparities and sort of what the root cause is and the air as to the reason why there are African American and Latino children in this city and in Brooklyn who have higher asthma rates than any other places. Is there something in the environment? Is there something that we're doing in our buildings that the city and the state is not addressing because of that fact? In terms of housing, everybody likes to throw affordable housing, but the affordability description from the mayor's perspective is not hitting who needs housing in this city. It's becoming increasingly difficult to actually stay here and live here and have a family here. It's becoming a playground for those who have millions of dollars to throw away every month, right? And so where people have lived and have worked and have built this city, they can no longer afford to live here, and particularly the Black and brown people, our neighborhoods are basically like you are squatting here, we're not building this for
Right.
you,
And
right? And so those are the issues
Yeah.
that we're focused on, and that's the hard work, because that's not
That's
the
what
work
needs to be
that's
done.
going to, be, in the daily news, that we're going to hearings, and that we're going to the chancellor and talking about education policy and things like that. Those things aren't salacious. Those things don't bring in, views. But that's the real hard work. That's the structural work that we need to do in order to make a change here. And
See,
so, that's
yeah.
why I would say when people argue about, where's the NAACP, we're working where you're not.
But see, the thing you was about to talk about, power. What do we do? We're in seats of so-called power. Those council members got to get up off their knees. You have a pseudo-progressive mayor that's talking about 200,000 units of affordable housing when he's gentrifying our neighborhoods. Most of that housing in my beloved East New York on the north side, him and Espinal, the council member there, they're coming in with 3,000 units, and half of them are market, and the other half we can't even afford to live in. So when you have a mayor pushing, we call it ethnic cleansing, they call it gentrification, a progressive mayor is pushing that. When you have council members, some of them that led to get on your knees, got off their knees last year, passed a budget the year before that, hired 1,200 more cops without any leashes on them to stop them from brutalizing us. So don't do all of this symbolized stuff, and then you get in the city council, and every development project that's going to gentrify Harlem, Crown Heights, and East New York and other communities, they vote for. Every budget that comes forward, no matter how much we're not getting our fair share of, they vote for. I've seen them do protests when I was there against them closing down daycare centers, against them closing down schools. They protest with the people, then go inside and vote for the budget that closes them down. That has to stop.
Eljoy, you spoke about some new realities. You listed these realities, but what is the NAACP doing about these new realities? And Charles, what are your colleagues in government doing about these realities
Well,
that were listed by Eljoy?
Well, the first thing is, raising awareness and educating our people on the issue, because people know what's going on, right? So people know, they feel it, right? You feel that your paycheck is not going, further than it's supposed to. You feel like you're being pushed out of your community. You feel not being able to afford to live here. And so then you have to educate people and let them know what the cause is, what the source is. And once you do that, it's easy then to activate people to say, this is the cause, this is the reason why daycares are closing. It's because, and then give them the source of the power, right? The source is contacting your representative. The source is not only protesting, but then having some consequences for the representatives who are making these choices, right? And so that's the work that we're doing now.
And I could tell you some concrete things that we've done. In East New York, we have 6,000 new units of real affordable housing. Where can you get 20% of a development unit for homeless people with subsidized rents? A homeless person in some of our developments can get a studio apartment, 400 square feet, for $215 a month rent. We passed in Assembly a New York Health Act that gives single payer free health care, and we have a plan to pay for it. We just got to get the Senate to pass it too. So, and we looked at the new mall that came out in East New York. We have over 2,000 jobs for people in our community, and we have a new restaurant that was opened up there by a community entrepreneur, Fusion East, who's doing a great job. So we got to use our seats to make sure that we get in economic development. We got 3 new parks developed so that people can get their health together. And our schools, we're fighting for the campaign for fiscal equity. They owe us billions of dollars. We got $800 million last year. We're looking for the other $3 billion next year.
Symbols of hate. We're seeing them all around us again. There's this resurgence. And I know the NAACP is continuing to do its job. We don't hear enough about the NAACP anymore. Joy?
Well, I'll work on trying to do a better to do a better job in our membership to
I'm not
do a better
criticizing
job.
you at all.
No, no, no. I mean, but I believe it's important to talk about the work that we're doing, and as much as we can, one, to increase the amount of people that we have that can help do the work, so we don't burn people out. But also, the work of NAACP is all volunteer, right? And so it's difficult while at the same time you're asking, you're fighting for people to be able to afford to live here, to be able to afford education, to be able to afford or get a job or maintain a job. And so those of us who are doing the work, sometimes we forget about promoting it, when we're so focused, because we see the direct connection that it has on people's lives. So sometimes you get a little, caught up in the weeds.
I'm getting the wrap-up signal.
I just want to say this real quick. We have Operation Power in East New York, and our goal is to get more black radicals elected to local power positions.
Assemblyman Charles Barron, NAACP Director in Brooklyn, L. Joy Williams, thank you so very much for being a part of Brooklyn 45.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we run out of time. Thanks to Assemblyman Charles Barron and to the New York head of the NAACP, L. Joy Williams. For people you know who may have missed this program, or if you want to see it again, it's on our Brooklyn 45 TV YouTube page. We'd love to hear from you. So post your comments on our Facebook page, Brooklyn 45 TV, or email us at info@brooklyn45.com. On behalf of our entire Brooklyn 45 team, I'm Sam Tate.